Well, another wonderful story that I remember about John was we were guests of Baron Hilton and John Flanagan and another wonderful gentleman named Bill Shea. And we were flying to Las Vegas, where Baron was going to host a shoot. And we were up there with Phil Harris and just a whole group of wonderful friends as Baron's guests. And I flew up on a commercial flight, and I knew that I was going to land within 15 minutes of the time John Myers landed, and Baron had gone up earlier in the morning. So I couldn't go with Baron because I was taking care of some business appointment, and so I took a commercial flight up. And of all my landings, I don't think I was ever in rougher weather. That sometimes you get these cross currents at the Las Vegas International Airport. And we got this airplane on the ground, blew a tire out of a Southwest flight, and I knew John was just a few minutes right behind me because I was going to meet him at where he and Lucia landed. And when I got over to there, I could tell that Lucia had the same kind of experience that I did. It was just terrible. I mean, and they're in a much smaller airplane than I am. And I said, well, what did you think of that approach and that final? And she looked right at me and she said, well, we made it, didn't we? So I always remember her sense of humor, but no one as good as pilot as John Myers was. Nobody likes flying in severe turbulence. It's not any fun. But he had done it all. So I had a spectacular life of wonderful memories of the man that I truly. I just can't describe how much I love this remarkable person.
Did he ever tell you about his childhood? I'm not sure how
Yes.
Was he an athlete or?
Well, yes. To introduce this subject, I was a guest of the chairman of the board of Wells Fargo Bank, a man named Dick Kovacevic. And we were at a car show in Monterey. Every year, it's the largest concourse of fine automobiles in the world, and it's called the Concours d'Elegance. And Dick was hosting a dinner, and a gentleman asked me, that sat there with me, he said he had heard that I was a good friend of Baron Hilton. And I said, well, yes, that's true. And he says that he owned Baron Hilton's father's 54 powder blue Coupe de Ville Cadillac that's a 100-point perfect car. And I said, well, how did that happen? He said, I like to restore things, and my mother had a 54 Cadillac convertible. And before I started restoring my mother's car, I found that there was this 54 Cadillac available in Riverside that had been given by Conrad Hilton to his secretary. And when she retired, the car became available and I bought it, so I used that as my experimental car. And I said, well, I'm always interested in looking for a unique gift to give to Baron, and would you sell me the car? And the gentleman said yes, he would sell me the car, but he preferred to give it to me just because he wanted the car to be returned to his family. And so I told John Myers about getting this car for a gift to Baron. And John says, well, where's the car? And I said, well, it's down near San Diego in a warehouse where this man has restored the car. And the gentleman who did this restoration was a very wealthy man whose father invented and patented the Rainbird, and had one of the largest irrigation companies in the world, because they were building golf courses all over the world and had thousands of employees working at this. So this man's passion was restoring cars and restoring airplanes and restoring. Having never been there, I went down to look at the car with John. And I was going to do this as a surprise to Barron to give him his dad's car. Well, when we walk into this industrial park, where it's like a CIA place because there's no markings on anything. There's an address, but nothing else is marked. And John and I pull in, and we call on the cell phone for the gentleman that owns the buildings there that were there. And so he comes out of this unmarked building and invites us in. Well, as we walk in, he has a twin-engine airplane hanging from the ceiling, and it's a 100-point, perfectly restored airplane that he learned to fly in. And I introduced him to John Myers, and this man knows everything there is about John Myers, and he said, "My God, Mr. Myers, you flew that airplane." And he said, "Yes, I did." And it was a twin-engine Beechcraft. And he said, "And you see that car over there? That's a 1927 Chevrolet. I drove that car to Mexico City my freshman year at Stanford. That very car right there. I knew your grandfather who owned the car." So I guess what I learned about John was he was a very inquisitive, curious young man. He loved to travel, and it wasn't long after he drove that car to Mexico City, he was flying his own airplane all over the place. So I'm going to have to find out who's calling me on the cell phone here. He'd outlived all of his friends, and so there weren't. I mean, he had this wonderful relationship with people like Bob Hoover, and I introduced Chuck Yeager to Baron Hilton, and now they're best friends. And so many of the legendary people that John was raised with, he outlived them all. And therefore, it was the younger generation of famous, the people like General Yeager and Bob Hoover and Clay Lacy and Baron Hilton that became his closest friends.
Did he talk about the P-61 when he was learning in the flying wing?
Oh yes. Not only did he talk about it, there were several movies made. I was privileged to be John's guest several times at the Bohemian Club, and the Bohemian Club in San Francisco has they do special tributes to famous members and members' guests, and one of the tributes they did was to Test Pilots Night. And John, being one of the leading test pilots, along with Chuck Yeager and Bob Hoover and Bud Anderson and a whole group of famous aviators, were on the dais, and a film that I had never seen before, that profiled the lives of these famous test pilots, including John Myers flying the flying wing, flying the B-61. The P-61, the Black Widow, and it was known as the Night Fighter. And so I saw the actual footage of John there before World War II, and then of course John's long service during the war as a continuing as a test pilot. It was interesting that he told me that Charles Lindbergh, who was probably the most famous person in America in the Depression, the tragedy that followed the kidnapping of his baby boy, and that trial and ultimate execution of the man that was convicted of killing the Lindbergh baby. Lindbergh went to, I believe he was in both Munich and in Berlin. And he was a guest of the head of the German Air Force, and of Adolf Hitler. And this visit got worldwide attention. And John always felt, I guess, sorry for Lindbergh for basically telling the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, that we weren't prepared to fight a war against the Germans because they had a superior air force to us. And Roosevelt didn't like, a potential candidate that Lindbergh was talked about to run against him. And Lindbergh was by far the most popular person in the United States that was critical of Roosevelt, or critical of our need to improve our military, and particularly our Air Force. And so Lindbergh's commission was removed. The president removed the colonel's rank. So in order for the colonel to get into the war, he had to participate as a test pilot, not as a member of the Air Force. And John always felt that that was unfair, because he always said that Lindbergh was one of the finest pilots and one of the nicest gentlemen that he ever worked with. But I ended up at many visits with the newer generation, the Bob Hoovers, the Clay Lacey's, the Baron Hiltons, the Chuck Yeagers, who were all 10 years to 15 years younger than John. And so the people that were his era, the people like Kelly Johnson and John Northrop, they were long since gone. There's a wonderful gentleman named Tom Jones who succeeded John Northrop as chairman and CEO of Northrop Aviation. And Tom is still alive and in good health. And he was one of John Myers' most admired friends.
We're meeting with him this couple days.
Well, you will enjoy it. Tom Jones was also one of Ronald Reagan's closest friends, a very, very close friend of the Reagans. And so my many years of association with John were in all types of situations. We were flying in his airplane. We would be fishing in Alaska. We'd be fishing in Mexico. We'd be shooting doves at his ranch, or ducks, or he was just an all-around world-class sportsman, and everything he did with ease. He made it look like it was the simplest thing in the world to fly an airplane, or to do anything, to shoot a shotgun, and fly a helicopter. I would often call him on a weekend and ask him, say that Barron and I are leaving for Venice Island, our duck club, and John would hop in his helicopter and fly over to be with us for the weekend. So he was an extremely versatile man. And one of the more sensitive stories I can tell about John is that after Lucia got sick and subsequently died, he always said that he married this remarkable woman who was way above his pay grade. And the reality was she had military clearance in World War II at the Pentagon. And after the war, she became one of the first women to join major corporations' board of directors. She was on, I believe, Bank of America and General Motors and very large companies' boards as a woman director, and that was the pioneering in those days. And but after Lucia died, John was very sentimental. While he dated, he had some attractive lady friends that were all 20 years or 30 years his junior. on one evening, I received a call from John, and I would often go by and have a cocktail with him at his home on Rodeo Drive, and I'd meet him there at 5 or 6 o'clock and have a drink, and sometimes we would go to dinner together always at the Los Angeles Country Club, because he just loved it there. And he asked me on this evening, he said, "Bill, could I join him tomorrow night for dinner?" And my wife and I, Nadine, we arrived at the Myers residence, and we were escorted into the a little fireplace area in the outdoor patio. And there I met General Jack Daly, the 4-star general, a retired fighter pilot that's head of the Smithsonian Air Museum. And Baron Hilton was there, Clay Lacey and his wife were there, Bob Hoover and his wife were there. So we were with John's very closest friends. And after we had a couple of drinks, John asked us to join him at the family dining room. And he explained to us as he sat at the end of the table that this was his maiden voyage, that he was hosting our dinner at the very first time that he had ever sat at the table that Lucia wasn't with us. And so it was to show how sentimental the man was. The day he died, I had the very good fortune of arriving right after the coroner picked up his body. And the reason I say that is my memories of John, I'm glad I didn't. I preferred not to see him dead. And but I did go up to his bedroom where his male aide, a man that worked for John that took care of him, found him in the bed that morning asleep. And when he was not able to get a response from John, he called Janice Merriweather and said Mr. Myers is not responding, and she was sure that that he had just overslept, and therefore called 911. And when they arrived, he was announced that he was dead. So it took several hours for the coroner to come to pick up the body. And